So, welcome everyone. My name is Priestess Yeshe, and today I'm going to be presenting for the Go With Goddess Symposium for the Mount Shasta Goddess Temple, my talk, which is Cultural Compassion and Friendship with Humanity. This is a topic that has come to my attention more and more over the years as I've traveled into various different locations with cultures that are really different from each other. And one of the main things that I did for my talk today was to try to, as best I could, decenter this talk as if I were speaking only as an American coming from the perspective of an American. Instead, I tried to include cross-cultural lessons that will be helpful for all of us from whatever background, whatever country we come from, and whatever cultural matrix we reside in, that will kind of help us to become better friends to each other, especially as our global goddess community gets more and more connected over the years due to the internet and pilgrimage. So a few years ago, I had a friend who said, the only identity that I really embrace is that I'm an earthling. And I loved that description. And I feel like travel gives us the opportunity to really reject or dissolve some of the identity labels that we've had around our place that we're from, or around our background, or around, who we think we are, and instead embrace this more global identity. I am an earthling. This planet is my home. Travel can open our minds to new ways of thinking. It can awaken memories of past lifetimes, and it can provoke investigation into unfamiliar and sometimes uncomfortable cultural concepts. For our purposes in the temple, to be a priestess is to be a friend to humanity. This means meeting people on their terms, making sincere efforts toward cultural competency, interrogating our biases, avoiding extractive behaviors, and opening to new foods, values, religions, and norms. Travel also means that sometimes we will effectively be and feel like the stranger. All of these things have the potential to challenge us, but they can also increase our capacity for compassionate exchange. Today, I'm going to make a short presentation and record that. And then at the end, we're going to have a roundtable discussion where we can talk about times when travel has felt challenging, and also when it helped us to become better friends with the world. So we have this narrative, cultural narrative, especially in cultures that are patriarchal, that women have been enclosed for millennia. And while it's true that under patriarchal cultural contexts, many women have experienced enclosure, it hasn't actually been universal, and it hasn't always been consistent either. When we look, for example, at the Afghanistan of today versus the Afghanistan of the 1970s, we see two very different cultural paradigms for women. And this has been the truth all over the world, in every culture, in every time. In ancient Mesopotamia, there was a woman named Ama who she was a well-known businesswoman. She had an extensive trade network, and she went around to various different places selling her wares to shops and merchants. And Hedwana, who many of us know as the woman who invented written language, she was a priestess and a princess. She actually was exiled from her Akkadian homeland, but then she later returned to it to preside at the temple of the moon god Nana. Her father, King Sargon of Akkad, actually placed her in their familial exiled lands to try to convince the people to take back the traditions of the Akkadians when they didn't necessarily always want to. And the writings of Enheduanna speak to the challenges that she had, as well as her visits to various different groups of people who were resistant at first to her father's rule and ultimately came together to form a society. Queen Artemisia I of Caria, the region that is now called Turkey, who, when it was Hellenistic, she led troops into battle and traveled across Anatolia. The female pharaoh Hatshepsut of Egypt governed her enormous kingdom up close. She traveled with an entourage. In modern times, Nellie Bly was a reporter who traveled boldly around the world. Her book is called Around the World in 80 Days. Actually, she did it in 72 days. Bessie Coleman went all the way to France to get her pilot's license after she first learned about the existence of airplanes. She was an African-American woman. She was banned from getting her pilot's license in America because of her race and her sex. But instead, she went to France and she got her pilot's license. Iris Love, a socialite from New York City, journeyed to the end of the Dacia Peninsula in Turkey, searching for the archaeological ruins of an Aphrodite temple, the temple of Aphrodite Euploia. So we have many examples of women who have spread their wings throughout history, and it's important for us to remember that we are not the first, nor are we even the most prolific travelers in modern times, that even in ancient times, women traveled, especially for spiritual purposes. When we travel as pilgrims to sacred sites, we are in effect meeting ourselves on the road. And this takes three main forms. We are rediscovering who we truly are, and that happens when we experience ourselves in new settings. So maybe you have habits at home that are so baked in that you don't even notice them anymore. And when you go and you travel and you experience yourself in a new space, all of a sudden, maybe those habits just fall away. We also can see how others with unique perspectives perceive us. Maybe we think of ourselves one way, but when we go somewhere else where there's people with a very different cultural paradigm, how they see us can illuminate for us aspects of our character, of our appearance, of our culture, and ourselves that we might not have paid attention to before. We see what parts of ourselves are activated in new terrain. Is there a different part of you that feels awake and alive in the desert than awake and alive at the ocean or in a forest? Do you thrive on big city energy, or do you love a mountain retreat? What spiritual epiphanies might arise as we travel, when we sort of get the downloads, the messages, the confirmations, those magical synchronicities that show us that either we're on the right path, or sometimes that show us we might want to think about a different path. And how are we growing when we observe ourselves on the road? When we're on the road, we are having experiences that are literally creating new neural networks in our brains. So we ourselves are growing. We're growing in our compassion. We're growing in our capacity to think. We're growing intellectually as we study and research the places that we go. The second way that we meet ourselves on the road is by exploring the unfamiliar. And this is where it's not as much about rediscovering parts of ourselves that we didn't know that were there, or that were there and got reactivated, but more, this is about finding out absolutely new things about ourselves and our lives and the world around us. We can allow ourselves to have new experiences. We can welcome opportunities to learn. We can sample cuisines and appreciate cultural arts in a non-extractive way, and we'll talk more about that a little bit later. We can, be present in the moment, which I think a lot of us, when we are going through our day-to-day routines, it's really easy to just get so caught up in the past or the future, the things we're ruminating on, or the things that we hope will happen, or the things we're afraid will happen, that just being present isn't as a big a part of our day-to-day lives. We're so familiar with our day-to-day lives that there are times when we might go through a whole day and at night realize that we didn't really do much that wasn't on autopilot during that day. So when we're in a new place, that exploration, that discovery is something that will stimulate us and help us to be more present in the moment. And when we are out there on the road, we are really much more likely to acknowledge some of the sacred coincidences that arise around us. We might notice a particular symbol or a particular statue in one place, and then if we see it again somewhere else, or a replica of it, or we make a connection between two different lands, it's so exciting. And then finally, meeting ourselves on the road is also about coming across challenges, which we're going to talk about some of the most common challenges today. Embracing the uncomfortable, cultivating a willingness to decenter our own life, our conditions as the norm. And this has been one that's been really instructive for me over the years. For example, very simple one. When you leave America and you go to other places in the world, a lot of times the beds are harder than here. It's just a norm, especially in Asia and in the Middle East. The beds are harder. You might be sleeping on a thinner mattress, or you might have some no memory foam, something. If you're used to a certain kind of norm of even how the furniture feels in a new place, it might not be like that. We have to adjust to novel sensory conditions. Those might include smells that we're not used to, being in a bustling marketplace somewhere and seeing that animals are being butchered right there in the market. Or it could be going somewhere that the weather is very harsh compared to where we live. So climate adjustments. Sometimes we feel like an outsider in a place, and we might be very conscious that when we walk into a space that people are looking at us, even staring at us, that people want to come up and talk to us. Sometimes we might feel a little bit nervous that in a space where we are the outsider, we don't know what the person's intentions are who are interested in engaging with us. And in some places that we go, we might find that it's not really safe to reveal very much about ourselves or our journey. And in other places, we might receive the warmest, most loving welcome and tons of curiosity about ourselves. And we endure questions and jokes sometimes at our expense. Sometimes we endure judgments from others when we're on the road. And we can then feel afraid or off balance. If we're somewhere and we don't speak the language, we might feel anxious because we don't have proper directions. If we're somewhere and we don't get phone signal or internet, Wi-Fi, anything, it might feel really scary because we don't have a way to connect with people back home or to let them know that, we are somewhere. Or we might find that when we go to a place where the crime is different than in our residential location, that we feel a little bit more on guard. So all of these different aspects of our journey are ways that we are meeting ourselves anew. We are getting to know who we truly are on the road. And in our last topic with Bree, we talked a little bit about, financial access, and I want to just bring it right to the forefront here. Travel is often correctly deemed only possible for the privileged few. And as air travel costs are expensive, this can be very noticeable. It can be really costly to travel. It requires time off from work or the freedom to work remotely. It can be difficult for women with children or elders in their care to get away, although Bree gave us such great advice about being able to travel with children. But still, it can be difficult for some. And some places are safe for certain ethnic groups, but not others. I've definitely heard from sisters of color that in certain places in Europe, they did not feel super safe. I've also heard from sisters who are Middle Eastern or Muslim that when they go to places, they don't feel safe. And obviously, everybody has places on earth where we might go where prejudices are still held either around women or around race or around any number of other identifiers that we carry on our skin or carry in our bearing. And that can be challenging and problematic. And so what we find is that for us to be able to travel in a certain amount of isolation from any danger, privilege is, financial privilege is required. At the same time, sometimes having that financial privilege to insulate oneself from any possible discomfort results in not really having an authentic experience of the place where you're going. So acknowledging one's privilege and acknowledging one's lack of privilege in every setting is an important baseline to establish. In this space, I'm privileged financially because I was able to afford to go here, but I'm disadvantaged because I don't cover my hair and I get a lot of stares, and people sometimes seem a bit hostile to me. Or in this space, I'm privileged because I cover my hair and I'm in a place where where other women cover, so I feel very part of things, but I'm disadvantaged because financially it's difficult for me to be here. There's always kind of a shifting sand of privilege in every situation that we find ourselves in. And just being able to acknowledge which privileges we have access to and which ones we don't in a given space helps us be more mindful about our safety and also about our impact on others. I will say this, for the woman who feels genuinely that she must travel in order to grow and heal, she will find a way to make it happen, even when facing obstacles, including financial obstacles. And I wanted to just point out, for example, women in Tibet who have very little access to money still make vast pilgrimages to sacred sites. They go on foot. And not only do they go on foot, but they will leave wearing only the clothes on their back, carrying one little pack of provisions, and then count on the generosity of strangers along the way. They will walk for miles and every few steps stop and make prostrations. And so I've been to Tibet and I've seen women doing this. And I now know for sure that for the determined woman, no matter what, she will find the way. There are ways that women can travel on foot or by bike. Last year in Turkey, I met some young women who were traveling I think they were traveling from like all around the world on their bicycles or bringing their bicycles via plane and ship. And they then, whenever they were on the ground, they rode their bikes. And a friend who also met these same young women, we met them in September of last year. And he recently told me by like September of this year, they had finally made it all the way to Japan. And they were just traveling with a backpack and the bicycle, and the three of them. Some women travel with their children and pets, like Kate said to us in the last talk with Bree, they will just pop their kids and pets in the car and take off, even for a little jaunt an hour or two away, just to get in a new space so that they can have some connection with the local land and some sense of adventure. There's also a lot of opportunities out there for women to apply for scholarships, fellowships, and residencies. There are specifically programs that guard, or that safeguard your access for certain types of experiences. There are writing retreats and artist retreats. There are work trade programs and volunteerism programs. There are fellowships, and there are, opportunities to be funded to go study. So while, there are still, some financial costs that might be associated with that, sometimes there are programs that can alleviate some of the financial burden. And there's also the ability to stay in hostels or do work trade, to travel as an au pair, or to travel as a pet sitter or a house sitter, or do a home switch, or to stay in hostels, especially if you are traveling on a budget. So even when it's difficult, and I want to acknowledge that, when we are talking about women's sacred travel, there are going to be women who are like, well, I don't have the financial privilege to be able to access that. But I just want to toss it out there that if you feel it, if you really feel that you must go, if you really want to make it happen, that yes, it might be a little bit difficult. It might take some time. You might have to really look around for resources. You might need to do crowdfunding. One woman who came with us to Egypt this year crowdfunded $6,000 for her trip in 3 weeks because people understood she needed this so much to be able to go and have this experience. So just be open, I guess, to the fact that the minute you decide it's going to happen, it's already begun. And it does require somewhat of a trust leap to say, all right, I'm going to put it out there. I'm going to try and access resources. I'm going to look at what's available. I'm going to find my way. And the internet and TikTok and Reels on Instagram are full of stories of really inspiring women who find a way, even on a shoestring budget, to go from place to place. Look for those strokes of luck, those non-traditional travel paradigms, and trust in your magic. When we're on pilgrimage, there are going to be uncomfortable moments. These uncomfortable moments sometimes are embarrassing. They might be actually dangerous. They might be physically demanding. They might be emotionally demanding. So I thought I'd just kind of go through, when we're on the road, yes, we're having epiphanies. Yes, there's like incredible magic happening. But also, some of our common challenges here are financial worries, as I discussed in the last slide. One of the things that I would say this is the number one thing that women come to me and say, how do you manage to travel? How do you do this? I have so many financial worries. I don't know how I'm going to make it happen. And so those financial worries really can impact one's ability to travel. It's similar, I think, especially if you've decided you're going to go, you're committed to going, but you're still worried. It's similar to laying there on the couch and thinking to yourself over and over, I shouldn't take a nap, I shouldn't take a nap, I shouldn't take a nap, instead of just going ahead, letting yourself take the half-hour nap, setting an alarm and saying, okay, I'll get back to my tasks when I wake up. We have to, at a certain point, say, I'm going to allow this. And I'm just going to share one thing about financial worries, because I don't want people to think that I'm unsympathetic to it. When I traveled in 2021, my husband and I were in the process of buying our house. We never thought we would be able to afford buying a house, but our landlord that we were living in this house came to us and he offered to sell it to us really, really reasonably at a much lower price than the houses in our neighborhood were selling for, because we had been good tenants at that point for 7 years. And he really wanted to see the house go to us. We were so grateful, but you can only imagine when I walked into mortgage lenders' offices and said, I am a self-employed tarot reader, that I got laughed out of a number of offices. So by the time I left for pilgrimage, in 2021, I had already been looking for a mortgage lender for over 6 months to help us finance our house, and it wasn't working. It was really a struggle. And right before I left, we found someone who said, this is going to be difficult, but I think we can make it happen. And then I proceeded to do every single thing that mortgage broker said you're not supposed to do. I was putting plane tickets on credit cards. I was traveling. I was trying to, had to find ways when I was like sleeping in a cave house in Turkey to get up on the roof so that I could call the bank in the middle of the night when it was open on the, west coast of California here, and talk to them to try to make sure that I could make a payment on something so that it wouldn't hit my credit report. I was filling out paperwork on the road. I closed on my house 3 days after I got back from pilgrimage. I actually, at a certain point, just had to say to the goddesses, I am putting this at your feet because I'm actually doing everything that I'm not supposed to be doing financially in order to get my house while I'm on the road. And I don't know how I'm going to make this happen. And sure enough, it all worked out. And I do think that part of the goal of sacred travel is to increase our faith in the idea that when you leap, the net will appear. And that doesn't mean to be financially irresponsible, but it does mean to give yourself a little bit of space to believe that you are on a path for which you are destined, and it will open doors for you. And I think that having a healthy dose of that, concept of financial responsibility with enough magical thinking can actually bring you to the destinations you seek. I also think that cleanliness and environmental variables, such as the weather, are big impactful things on pilgrimage. When you get to a place, and if you look around and you notice this is not, a sparklingly clean hotel room that's been, exquisitely groomed. It's simple, it's rustic. You might get somewhere and they say, well, we turn off the water because there's a drought. We turn off the water here from 10 in the morning until 6 at night. You might get somewhere and not have a hot shower, but you can get a cold one. Or like when I went to Egypt this year, you might get somewhere and the weather is actually physically dangerous. So being out there in 115 degrees at high noon is not easy on the body. So those are some of the causes of discomfort environmentally. There's also religious and cultural customs that can feel outdated, offensive, or limiting, particularly if you're a Western feminist. Going somewhere and feeling like there's an obligation to cover your body, to cover your shoulders, going somewhere and you can't order certain types of food because there's religious prohibitions on them, going somewhere and feeling like you're seeing more men than women in the public sphere, which is true in many places, going somewhere and finding that, you are considered messy or dirty or rude simply because you don't adhere to those or even know about those local cultural norms. All of these things can be challenging. There are also very real governmental and legal restrictions that you will face in some places when you're traveling. For example, if you want to travel in the Tibetan Autonomous Region, you will need to secure not only the main permit that will allow you into the region, but you may need to secure additional permits to drive on particular roads, to cross particular bridges and waterways. You may find that you get to an entire province and you're turned away at the border of the province because they're not allowing outsiders in at that time. So that's, one set of governmental restrictions that you may face. It doesn't mean that they're insurmountable. You'll want to have a really great guide who knows how to navigate those things, but it can certainly frustrate you in terms of keeping to an ironclad itinerary. You may find that if you go to certain places that there are easier and progressively more difficult processes for acquiring a visa. And there may be paperwork you have to fill out or health forms you have to fill out. And all of those little steps can be fiddly. And if you miss even one of them, it can leave you stranded in the airport where you have to wait until the passport office opens the next day, or you may find yourself being turned away because something wasn't completely perfect. I had an experience just recently when I was flying from Jordan to Turkey, where I had purchased my traveler's visa ahead of time. I had accidentally transposed two of the numbers on my passport, just reversing them. And when I got to the Turkish border, I was turned away. Fortunately, I was able to go and get a new visa that had the correct passport number right there in the airport. But honestly, those little kinds of mistakes can mount and add up over time if you're not careful. There's also illnesses and exhaustion. Some of us might experience getting sick because we are in a different microenvironment, or honestly, if you have a long plane flight and you get on it and there's someone who's sick, the odds are that you could be exposed to that. You might feel exhausted because a trip has you go to multiple different places in a day. And for those of us who are introverts, we can really experience burnout, particularly if we find that we're with a group and we're with people all the time. So these are some of the, uncomfortable moments around that. There's also unexpected conflict with traveling companions that can crop up. Pilgrimage can bring us to a place where parts of ourselves are coming forward, and those parts of ourselves are not necessarily as emotionally or psychologically groomed as the rest of us. Or we might find ourselves coming up against other people who have parts of themselves that are coming forward that are not as psychologically or emotionally groomed. And so, just like I jokingly said in Bree's presentation, that even a 45-year-old person can turn into a cranky 3-year-old when they're hungry. We will sometimes have uncomfortable moments with traveling companions, and learning just to kind of really have compassion for that and forgive, move on, to go in faith that, travel brings out stressors and that everybody's allowed to kind of have a moment sometimes can go a long way to alleviating that. And finally, sometimes travel brings forward important, painful lessons from spirit. There are, of course, the times when we go to a sacred site and we walk in and we feel like that choir of angels is singing, or we feel like the goddess herself is appearing and paving our path, with gold. Or we might have incredible synchronicities that confirm that we are exactly where we are meant to be. And we also sometimes might go somewhere, walk in, and experience something very different. Maybe somewhere that we've idealized in our mind is actually kind of crowded and dirty and very commercial. Or maybe we go somewhere and we thought we were going to have such a great psychological connection, but instead we just kind of felt flat. Sometimes we might go to a place thinking with the intention that we're going to activate some aspect of ourselves that we want to bring forward. And we may find that the challenges that are presented along the way make it very difficult for us to feel the magic there for whatever reason. These important, painful lessons from spirit can be extremely illuminating. And I want to just kind of talk about, like, when challenges arise like these that I mentioned, who we are when things go wrong is just as important as who we are when things go right. So without the challenges that we encounter on a pilgrimage, it's not actually a growth experience. A resort vacation that guarantees maximum comfort is not the same thing as a pilgrimage. A pilgrimage will give us challenges. And when we have challenges on pilgrimage, we are actually in the ideal setting to put our spiritual beliefs to work and to find compassion for ourselves and others. We can grow beyond our usual comfort zones. And through that process, we become who we want to be. So yes, sometimes you might walk into an ancient temple and you just feel electrified and everything is coming online and messages are flowing and everything feels perfect. And at the same time, if you walk into a temple and you see that there's trash on the ground and you see that there's kind of a guard there who won't let you pray at the altar, and you see that there's, a group of people over in the corner just taking selfies and they don't seem to even know how important this is. If you walk out of there in a huff and complain about how bad the experience was, you've missed the point, because your spiritual beliefs should tell you, go over and offer the people who are taking selfies, hey, would you like me to take a photo of the group? Go over and joke with the guard and say, hey, how amazing is it for you to be able to protect such an incredible ancient site? What is the craziest story you've experienced of someone coming here? You can be the one who bends down and picks up the trash from the ground and puts it in the bin. And in each of those types of responses, you are living your spiritual beliefs and becoming the person that you want to be. If we pay attention, the lessons associated with our challenges on pilgrimage will actually often follow the tone or the mythos of the place that we visit. So a journey to a temple of Aphrodite can help us learn something valuable about love. A visit to the sea might bring up unshed tears. A mountain retreat might test our endurance. A visit to a Buddhist site might reveal our habits of impatience or aggravation to us. So when we encounter a challenge in a sacred place, really look at the myths of the sacred place or the spirit of the place to ask yourself, why would this be arising right here, right now? And how can I use that experience to help me become a better person? If we observe what arises in these settings, then we can see just how deeply we've been conditioned to respond in specific ways. So if you're the kind of person who walks by trash at home and you walk by the trash at the sacred site and you don't pick it up, it's showing you this is who you've become. You've become desensitized. You've become inured to the trash, to the environmental destruction. But if you bend down and you pick up that trash while you're on pilgrimage because, oh my goodness, I can't believe this litter is in this sacred place, you're also more likely to be the person who will pick up the trash at home. So thankfully, when we can see this conditioning so clearly because we're meeting ourselves on the road, looking at ourselves in a new place, then we're really empowered to change that conditioning and to change our responses. So we also carry an invisible baggage with us when we go on pilgrimage, and that invisible baggage is personal bias. I want to make a discernment between preference or need and bias. So we know some challenges will likely arise on pilgrimage. And at the same time, it's not wrong to have reasonable expectations of well-being. If you're a vegetarian or a vegan, to be able to find food. If you have dietary restrictions of gluten or allergies, to get those little cards so that you can, in the language of the place, so that you can ensure your safety. If you have to do things that regulate your nervous system, or if you have medications you need to take, if you have safety preferences based on past experiences, maybe you're not willing to ride in a car with just jump in a taxi or grab an Uber. In that case, you're going to need to look into alternatives such as hiring a private driver. There are all kinds of specific needs that ensure that a person can participate meaningfully and fully in the pilgrimage experience. So when I say, well, there's challenges, I'm not saying you should compromise the basic standards of your quality of life, certainly not compromise your safety, your health, or your well-being. And then there's also just the people who go on pilgrimage with and a vision of how they want things to unfold. It's not necessarily a need, but they are holding a hope. And in all of these cases, we can exercise preference and discernment and awareness about what will meet our needs and what will not. We can ask for those needs to be met and respected. We can do our best to avoid what we don't want. We can obviously say, like, if I need a day off today, a rest day, or I think I can walk along this path, but I don't think I can climb that hill. Or I think that I might need to take a pedicab because I'm too winded or tired to get back to the hotel on my own. These kinds of things can be arranged, and none of those things necessarily involve bias. Those are personal needs and preferences. But where bias comes in is when we think that because we don't like something, or we don't relate to something, or we don't approve of something, that it's inherently wrong. So, for example, if you go to a country where the standard greeting invokes the god that is worshipped there, and you personally don't feel a connection to that deity, it doesn't make all the people there wrong for saying their greeting to you. Their greeting is their greeting, and they're allowed to have it. And I think sometimes when we go into a space, we have a pretty sharp confrontation of some of our biases, because if something is uncomfortable for us, we might have an invisible bias or an invisible baggage that we're carrying that says, well, because I don't like it, it must be wrong. We can cultivate, instead of bias, a gentle curiosity in place of judgment. And when I say gentle curiosity, I mean really the kind of like, oh, I wonder why this is the norm here, or, oh, I wonder when this began, as opposed to kind of a more assaultive curiosity, which is like, why do you think this is so important? Why do you do that? Don't you wish it were different? Don't you feel like it shouldn't be this way? So a gentle curiosity says, like, let me draw nearer to this thing that makes me uncomfortable, or that I don't understand, or that I don't relate to. Let me open myself to learning, where bias will be a bit more aggressive, more assaultive, or more extractive, and only want to take portions of the lesson away, or will create a wall of aversion. We can remember also that when we are in a sacred place, we are not owed justifications or explanations for things that might seem confusing to us, but are normalized within the culture that we're visiting. And I'll give an example of this. When you go to mainland Greece, if you want to go to the Temple of Delphi, Temple of Apollo at Delphi, the seat of the ancient Pythia, you will want to bring your oracle cards. You will want to bring your pendulum. You will want to bring your divination tools. You will want to stand there wearing a veil and take a beautiful photo in front of the temple. You will want to say a prayer. You will want to do all of these things. And if you attempt to do any of these things, a guard will blow a whistle and yell at you. Now, when this happened to me, because of course, my very first time visiting the Temple of Delphi, I whipped out my tarot cards and I pulled some cards so that I could get a message, because there I was in this most powerful place of ancient prophecy, and immediately got the whistle and the yell. No, no, madam, you cannot do that here. No, put that away right now. I was shocked. I wanted to fight with her. I really wanted to argue with her. Like, how can you do this? This is the place where you do the divination. Like, why wouldn't I be allowed to do this here? But later, I asked one of the guards at another site why these types of spiritual and religious observances that are so important to me are not allowed there. And the answer was really interesting. The woman explained that not only is Greece an Orthodox Christian country, and so 98% of the people there are, even if they are quietly practicing the ancient ways, they are still nominally Orthodox. So it's offensive to the sensibility. She also further illuminated that the Ministry of Tourism of Greece looks at the hashtags on social media every day and looks to see the photos of the people who are violating the rules of the place. And if people have posted photos of themselves violating the rules of the place, and it's included in the hashtags, the people at the site who work there get in trouble. Further, I had another conversation with a dear friend in Greece who explained to me he didn't want to say it. I came out with my American self and said it right out loud. I said, hey, listen, I have a really direct question for you. When Americans or other people come here to Greece and they want to go around to places like dressed in togas, or they want to do like a toga party, or they want to like go to a place and take their Instagram photos and look, like as if they were dressed in ancient garb, does it kind of feel like we're putting on Greek face? And he looked at me and he couldn't believe I asked. And he didn't want to answer because he didn't want to hurt my feelings. But then he dropped his head and he quietly said, yes, sometimes it feels like you're mocking us, or even if it's innocent, even when it's good and people are trying to do something good, it doesn't really feel always very respectful of our ways. And so for our purposes, when we go to a place where there are rules, prohibitions, cultural norms that we don't really understand, that gentle curiosity can help us draw nearer. After I asked that question and we had that conversation, it was like a veil was lifted between my friend and we were able to move into much deeper topics about cross-cultural exchange, because I think he knew he was safe to say to me, hey, this is cool and this isn't cool. And when I spoke to the guard at at Eleusis, where I asked her about why weren't we allowed to do certain photos and stuff like that, she actually then, after I talked with her for 10 or 15 minutes and really listened to her, quietly, secretly came over and said to me, here, listen, if you want to do a photo with your group, get everyone together. I'll take the photo for you. Please just don't use the hashtags. And we had such a beautiful photo. So sometimes we can get closer to our hosts through this gentle curiosity. I also think it's very important for us to note that sometimes we might put our hosts at risk if we are not behaving according to the cultural norms. So one example is, if you go to central Tibet, and you are acting, in ways that are specifically outwardly Buddhist, if you are carrying a picture of, say, the Dalai Lama, if you have materials in your suitcase that might seem like they're offensive, you're actually putting your hosts at risk for the police to come and question them and say, why were you hosting this person? You yourself might also be at risk. So learning to blend in and to almost allow your cultural norms to become invisible in favor of truly getting to know the cultural norms where you are doesn't necessarily mean you agree with everything that you're seeing or experiencing. It just means that you care about the people, the land, and the culture where you are. Now, that said, nobody expects us to all become overnight experts in the religious and cultural mores of an unfamiliar country. However, due diligence ahead of time can make us great guests. A little research goes a long way to educating pilgrims on some of the more sensitive areas they might encounter, such as expectations around clothing and modesty. Do you need to cover your shoulders and knees in this place? Do you need to cover your head? If you go into this place, what kind of hospitality is expected and how do you respect spaces? For example, Are you in a place where you would never show up at someone's home empty-handed? Are you in a place where saying no to food is considered offensive? Are you in a place where if you walked into someone's home wearing your shoes, they will be absolutely aghast? You have to be aware of bodily contact. There are cultural paradigms in which it is discouraged for women and men to touch each other socially or casually, and where public displays of affection are also dissuaded. In terms of financial matters, if you go to Japan and you try to just hand your money with one hand to the cashier, they're going to look at you, because normally you hand your money with both hands and they receive it with both hands and they hand their change back to you with both hands. Or in another culture, you would never hand the money directly to the person. You would place the money on the counter. They would pick it up. They would place the change on the counter. You would pick it up. So just a little research ahead of time about that can be very helpful. There are going to be places where you will not find pork products. You will not find alcohol. There will be other places where culturally, the main dish is lamb. And if you don't eat lamb, you're going to really need to know what is the word for lamb in that culture so that you don't end up eating it. And then spiritual expression, like I sort of alluded to previously, it's great if you're standing in an ancient temple having a total amazing download, but that may or may not be the best place to start channeling messages and telling people that you're a representative of the goddess. And definitely there's a wealth of information and articles out there about the different types of issues that can arise with people. For example, doing yoga poses in sacred sites and having others feel like that was really problematic. Like one such example is people showing off yoga poses at the historical places where there were concentration camps. Obviously, you've really got to be aware of the set and setting, and a sincere effort at cultural competency will go a long way toward becoming friends with humanity. Last but not least, we really need to remember that when we go to a holy place, we often feel uplifted, we feel awakened, empowered, we feel inspired to be more whole, to be more free. It is natural for us to want to bring that feeling home and to adapt our lives to prolong or anchor the good energy that we gained while we were on the road. That might mean we purchase items, mementos, or clothing. We might allow new words or phrases to enter our personal communication. We might learn new recipes, decorate our homes with colors, patterns, or photos from our trip. We might clean and change our altars, setting up a fresh space to honor what we've learned on our journey. Or we might begin research and we might want to study more about where we've been. It's essential to acknowledge that our subjective experience of a place is not merely based on the spirits of the land in relationship with us, but also that an entire cultural paradigm gave rise to and has sustained the wisdom and magic that we encountered when we were there. This would not be possible without the lives of thousands of people over time who have tended this land and held this cultural memory. So when traveling, be sure to treat the people with respect, patronize their endeavors, pay a fair amount for the goods you purchase, haggle when it's culturally appropriate, but not so much that it causes harm. Appreciate their creations. Resist the seductive tendency to try to extract the essence of your experience from its foundational matrix. There is no Turkey without the Turkish people. There is no Tibet without the Tibetan people. So at best, we can take home a glimmer from a place, but the diamond that casts that glimmer is not for the taking. And when we are the outsider, when we are the stranger who has come into a space and we have received such bounty of connection, then we can acknowledge that, but we want to make sure that we do it in a way that gives something back rather than merely extracts. So we're just at the end of this lecture portion, and we're going to open up in a minute to a little roundtable just to share some experiences and talk. But before we go, I wanted to just share here that this is the 2024 pilgrimage schedule for the Mount Shasta Goddess Temple. We're going to Cyprus, Crete, Portugal, France, Bulgaria, Orlando, Malta and Sardinia, Turkey, Greece, and Mexico. We're going to several different globally renowned festivals, such as the Festival of Washing the Statue of Kali Sara in the south of France, and going to the Magdalene Cave near there. We're going to go to the Rose Kazanlak Festival in Bulgaria. We're going to be in Mexico for Dia de los Muertos. And we're also going to be going to a couple other events, the Portuguese Goddess Conference, the Summer Magic Festival in Orlando. And then there's also our travels that are not festival related, going to Cyprus for our Aphrodite retreat, and Crete to go to Heraklion and Matala. We're going to go to Malta and Sardinia to explore the unique priestess and tombs and goddess sites there. Turkey to the temples of Artemis, Aphrodite, Hecate, and to see some of the incredible mosaics. In Greece, we're actually going to do a teaching symposium about the gods and goddesses of Delphi. So you're welcome to come along. And for those watching this, you can find the information at mountshastagaddesstemple.com. So thank you very much for watching today. And if you're watching this later, I hope that this has been helpful. And now we're going to close the recording and open up to some discussion.